Today's episode of Teacher Talk, we talked to Sean Leonard, Director of School Quality at National Heritage Academies, and we talked a lot about some of the challenges that a new teacher might experience when they transition into their own classroom. And ultimately, we talked about how a new teacher can combat some of these challenges that they might experience in their first day, their first week, and ultimately their first year. This podcast is brought to you by Refer and Earn. Get paid to work with your friends. To get started, visit MyNHA and click on the Refer and Earn icon. You can make up to $500 with each candidate referral that you complete. Mr. Sean Leonard, how are you?
Good. I'm actually, I was at Westfield yesterday, back there today. Going well. Kids obviously excited about being at school, at the new school, and lots of smiling faces. So, no, it's going well.
So obviously with a new school year comes new teachers. Teachers that have been in college for 4 or 5 years learning how to be a teacher. And I don't think it's any secret that there are those that struggle transitioning into a classroom of their own. And I guess my question for you is, what are some of these challenges that face a new teacher once they have a classroom of their own?
Yeah, so I think, it starts with after going through the 4 plus years of their undergrad program, and learning about the theory of teaching, and even getting into some of the practice during student teaching. There's a lot of excitement there, but then walking into the classroom and having your kids who you don't know, and you don't know what strengths they bring to the table, what growth opportunities the kids have. It can be overwhelming, because now you're taking everything that you learned over the last 4 years and trying to apply it in the real world, and it doesn't always fit. Like, you got to learn how to adjust and find your own way, along with being very organized and learning the curriculum and learning, what lesson planning and instructional strategies being implemented, like all of that at the same time on the first day.
Teachers in general are a segment that fascinate me a great deal, mostly because every teacher you talk to will say, I had a second grade teacher and that's what made me want to be a teacher, or I had a great fourth grade teacher and that's what made me know that teaching is something I want to do. I would imagine for those that are going to be teachers that have a great deal of passion for education and providing support for the youth, that can be incredibly frustrating to struggle with transitioning into a classroom after you spent a good portion of your life knowing that this is what you want to do.
Well, so, yeah, I mean, it would be very frustrating, but I think the other side you got to think about it too is, so with a lot of teachers, they were, for the most part, you have a good percentage that are outliers, but for the most part, they were pretty successful in school. So, they were successful not only in their own school experience, but also as they started to enter into their actual program. And so this idea of not doing well, that's not what they're used to. And so to walk into a classroom and at the end of the day, you're like, oh my goodness, like I didn't do well, or I'm so frustrated. That's an experience that they haven't had before. And so I think it goes back to, really being thoughtful about, okay, so taking it one day at a time for success. And then also, have that whole growth mindset from Carol Dweck with, hey, it's all about getting better and improving versus, dwell on the fact that, you just haven't done well right now. So.
Do you remember your first year of teaching?
Yeah, very, very clearly. So I was working at a school in Detroit, west side of Detroit, and I was 23. And I struggled at first with how to have that balance between having building those positive relationships while also having high expectations for behavior. And what I mean by that is oftentimes new teachers struggle with wanting to be students' friends and not holding them accountable for their behavior. And it may not seem that way, but kids want that. Kids want structure. Kids want high expectations. They may not always come out and say it, but they do crave it and they enjoy it. And you can do that while also still have a good connection with them. And that's what I struggled with the most to start. And so I remember my first year, early on, you know, because I was so young and because a lot of those kids came from the same neighborhood that I did, and quite a few of them, I came up with their parents as peers or even as high school classmates. So that part, you know, I had to learn along the way, but eventually, you know, I think that's what helped me is understanding that, yeah, you know, kids want structure, kids want high expectations, but they also want to be cared about, and you can find a strong balance between the two.
So if I'm a new teacher, what are you telling me in terms of how to get through some of these first year teacher issues? You know, what can I work on? What can I do in my classroom that will help me make it through my first year or really kind of solve some of these issues that I might be experiencing?
A couple things. One, being very thoughtful and intentional and purposeful with building strong relationships with their kids. You know, through every interaction opportunity, whether it be, you know, right from the start when kids walk in the door, whether it be sending home a note for every kid by the end of the second week, just celebrating something positive that happened in the classroom, whether it's taking time for the first couple weeks of school to have lunch with your kids, sit in the lunchroom with them, just taking all those different moments to build relationships with the kids, I think is really important, and the successful ones do that. But then also, the successful ones are really, they sweat the small details. So when you think about the structure of the school day, we talk about, on the instruction side, anticipating student responses, where really you want to anticipate student behaviors when it comes to the structure of your day and plan for those behaviors to actually happen so you can be prepared for when it does. So, you know, how kids enter into the classroom, how they turn in their homework from the previous day, how they line up from, you know, lunch to enter into your classroom. Just all those different details, the successful new teachers plan all of those out and are really intentional with sweating those details as much as possible.
So do you think that's one of the main issues that new teachers are experiencing? It's not so much the curriculum that they're having an issue with, but it's more on the behavior side, that now you have, you know, 20 or 25 students in your classroom, and that's a lot to deal with right from the first day.
Yeah, so there's an old saying that kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so that's really the foundation of the classroom. You know, kids will do anything for you once they know that you truly care about them and their success. Even when they're challenging in their behaviors, when you build that strong relationship with them, yeah, you can easily redirect them and keep it moving. And so the curriculum side is going to come. So, you know, new teachers spent 4 years learning how to teach, learning the pedagogy of, you know, research-based instructional strategies. And they've even practiced them in the classroom themselves, but it's the real-world experience around how do you build a strong classroom community, which begins with those positive relationships between the teacher and the student, and then you're also teaching how students need to be positive towards one another to build that strong culture. So, yeah, like that's where a lot of the challenges happen with our newer teachers. And so when I think about, like I said, the new teachers, that I've worked with, and even through my own experience, and I wasn't the best new teacher, but I do think that that was one of the things that I did well, which was building those strong connections with students, which helps so much with everything else. And I think that's the foundation.
And I assume that these new relationships that you're building with your students is something that doesn't happen on the first day. That's something that you continuously have to build on throughout the course of the school year.
Yeah, I even think that, it's a misconception that you start building relationships the first day of school. So I think you actually start building relationships the first day you are hired. So, the successful teachers, start to set that foundation before the first day of school by how they interact with their families and with their students before they walk in the door. So, what does communication look like? Like I remember when I first came to NHA, and I was a principal in residence, and I was working at Achieve Academy. And one of the things that we talked about was, this idea of building strong relationships. And so there was a strategy that, I tried when I was there. And so for the first month of school, every Friday, I took maybe 5 or 7 of the 6th grade students and called every one of those families. And so by the end of the month, every kid had a phone call from me. And the purpose of the phone call was, 1, to introduce myself, and 2, just to talk about something positive that they had done that week. And the connection that just that phone call made with so many families, that's what we talk about with building relationships. So, a newer teacher could do the same thing during the summer before the first day of school.
It's funny you say that, because I associate phone calls home from a teacher to be a bad thing, right? So you have your teacher saying, I'm going to call home and say, that you're acting out in class and things like that. But you're saying phone calls home can be a good thing.
Well, yeah. Well, think about it. So just like with academics, kids are learning behavior strategies also. And what I mean by that is, they're going to walk in the door, and just like with, working on math, they're going to make mistakes with math problems. They're going to make mistakes with their behavior too. The difference is, when they make mistakes with their behavior, what works well is how many positive deposits has the teacher made before you have to redirect Sean for his behavior. Because if all Sean hears from the teacher is, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, or as a parent, if all you hear is, your son is not doing this, your daughter's not doing that, there's no positive connection there. So if you can start to provide those positive deposits, it makes that redirection phone call a lot easier, and you get that connection even better. So, like, you're going to have it, but be proactive versus reactive around.
So I think the points you hit on about building successful contact points with your students, building that culture, building a relationship between you and your students is important. But as a new teacher, are there things that they can do from a peer level with other teachers in their building, or with administrators, or with their principal, things that they can do that might make this transition easier?
Making connections with other staff is going to be key. And the reason why I say that is, so, how you run your class, Scott, is going to be different than me, because we have 2 very different personalities. But we might be able to share strategies, and how you implement that strategy might look different than I, because of our different personalities. But if we don't make the connection, I'm not able to see some of the strong things that you're able to do in your classroom and make it my own. So as a new teacher, don't isolate yourself, because then you limit your ability to be developed while working with others, because you're only learning from yourself and you're only learning from your own mistakes versus, hey, learn from others' mistakes, learn from other strategies, make them your own, and then try them. So that's the other side too, is don't be afraid to try new things or try new strategies in your classroom when, things don't work out the way that you want. Because you got to find your way in order to be a successful teacher. And like I said, it's going to be similar but different in every classroom because of the personality of the teacher.
Is that something that can be intimidating for a new teacher to say? Reaching out to other teachers and saying, hey, I need help with this. I need support with this. I need some guidance in this regard.
Absolutely. Because you're being vulnerable with your peers and even with, your supervisor, your dean or your principal about, hey, I don't know this. But trust that vulnerability will be supported by opening up those learning experiences from others. And it does take some trust there. So that's where, the relationship that you have with, your dean or even your principal and even your peers as a new teacher comes into play, because those are the people that you're going to go to when you need support. And if they don't know that you need support, they can't help you. And they are there to help you, but if you're not willing to open up to some of the things that you really need support with, then you limit your ability to be supported and to be developed, just like if you're just working with yourself and not working with your peers. So it can be scary to say I don't know, but I guess I've learned, over the years that that's the only way to get better is to be that vulnerable.
So if you could go back to 23-year-old Sean Leonard, what advice would you give him for his first day of school, his first week, but more importantly, his first year of teaching?
So I would tell myself that it'll be okay. Because I remember that first year, like, it was hard. Like, I came home exhausted. And yeah, it'll be okay. Like, you'll figure it out. And because I had really good relationships with other teachers, that some of them became really good friends and are still my friends now, I think that really helped me with figuring it out my first year. So, the advice that I would give myself is, just trust the process. If I had to go back and rewind, the past 20 plus years and say, hey, would you do something different now that you know the past? Absolutely not.